Magnus Carlsen has been playing very impressively in this Norway Chess Tournament 2016. Hasn't really looked in any danger at all in his games, and of course in round 7 he destroyed Vladimir Kramnik. In round 8 he faced Levon Aronian, who opened with his customary English and a fianchetto, and Carlsen met this very solidly with a kind of Slav centre pawn, c6 and d5. Carlsen has been playing like this in his black games, not messing about too much, pawn in the middle. Somehow a very staunch openings as black. And Aronian continues in his very steady way, just fianchettoing the second bishop, but of course this is not an opening that is going to win any great prizes for originality or surprise. Now here, if I were playing black, I would look at just bringing out the queen's bishop, perhaps just to g4. I think I might have even played like this once actually. And if the knight goes to e5 to attack the bishop, then actually that can be dealt with very well because there's a pin there. And let's say d3, well, you can just play knight d7 here, or you can just give up that bishop and then to set up this absolutely rock solid pawn chain and knight d7, having got rid of the bishop behind those pawns. And this is a decent setup for black. But I like it that black maintains this centre pawn. I think this is one of the big themes of the games that we've been looking at so far in this tournament. Control of the centre and how important that is, which was why I was really surprised by Carlsen's decision to exchange on c4. And then he played c5. Well, already I slightly prefer White's position because he's managed to exchange a b pawn for a d pawn. So in other words, that means that White has more pawns than black in the centre of the board, 3 against 2. Now, not very significant at the moment because those pawns aren't going anywhere for the moment, but it does mean that, for example, White can use the semi-open b file to put pressure on black's queen side. So let's see how this works. So after d3, knight c6, and now here an excellent move from Aronian, knight e5, played very quickly. Yeah, incidentally, Carlsen thought for 25 minutes over knight c6, so very odd kind of time management actually. Knight e5 is a good move because it opens up the bishop's diagonal. Now, knight takes is probably the best idea, and then just to exchange off at least one of those bishops. And this has been played before in a couple of games. Now, a very old game between Leonid Stein and Shamkovich, played in the Soviet Union in 1971, went knight g7, and this shows just how, with very simple moves, White can build up pressure on the queen side. So rook b1, and in combination with the bishop threatening here, rook b8, queen a4, bit more pressure, a6, queen a3, better pressure here, and after b6, White simply doubled rooks on the b file, and that pawn on b6 is a permanent weakness, a highly unpleasant position for black. And you can see that, well, the only real weakness in White's pawn chain is the pawn on e2, but of course that can be very easily defended, so no real problems there. Gelfand had this position against Vachier-Lagrave, and, well, he defended better. I think this was a blitz game or a rapid game. Gelfand defended better, so he put the knight on d6, which at least covers b7. Nevertheless, there is no doubt that white has a very pleasant position here, and once again there is pressure on the b file, rook b1 and so on. Now, Gelfand managed to hold that game, but still a tough struggle. So a kind of classic minority attack with this a-pawn pressing against these two pawns. That's certainly what black should do, though. But Carlsen played knight a5, and he'd obviously prepared this one, played it fairly quickly. But that knight is in a very unfortunate position at the side of the board. There you go, knight's on the rim of dim. I'm afraid it doesn't really go anywhere. Now, what he was trying to do with this, well, one idea behind knight a5 is that now perhaps you can use this pin with knight here. But that's the point of queen c1, to protect the bishop, so don't have to worry about that any longer. Queen c7 and then knight d2, white develops carefully. Now knight e8, but f4, good move, just supporting that knight. And, well, black should probably push this knight away, although f6 is a pretty ugly move. And let's say after knight b3, you can see that that knight can't retreat because the c-pawn is on. Does that work? Yeah, it should work. That's right. You can take it. Don't need to worry about the pin because of d4. And this exchange is clearly favourable for white, because at some moment you can probably exchange off the b-pawn for the c-pawn, and then you have an absolutely wonderful pawn centre that will eventually advance. But Carlsen played knight d6, and he said afterwards, yeah, clear mistake. After bishop c3, that knight is in massive trouble. Now if that knight retreats, then, well, clearly black's position is rotten to the core. That pawn is a goner. Something's a goner anyway. Carlsen played rook b8, trying to step out of the diagonal and perhaps play b6. So queen a3, attacking this knight, and that allows, well, now black can play b6, but, well, Aronian very coolly just hacked that off and played knight b3. So he's given up one of those bishops, but actually it's not a lot that Carlsen do. That knight now threatening both pawns. Now Carlsen played knight b7 here, bit of a miserable move. I mean, it's hard to make a good recommendation here, but, well, knight e5 is a bit more, knight f5 is a bit more active, and then maybe rook b2. But listen, black is a lot worse here. It's a horrible position. And Carlsen played knight b7, but again, very coolly played by Aronian. He gave up the second bishop, and then just took this pawn on c5. And Carlsen actually can't really use those bishops. And after d4, well, there you go. Those centre pawns start to look really menacing, and they're just protecting those knights. Objectively, Carlsen is lost here. He struggled on. Rook d8, attacking the pawn. That was defended. Rook d1. f6, attacking the knight. And the knight came back to f3. That knight kind of dominates the bishop here. It's really ugly. If rook b4, then the queen switches across. And, well, you can't play rook takes pawn because of queen b3 with a nasty pin. And otherwise, well, let's say queen d6 covering e6, then rook c1. White is able to hold those centre pawns, and ultimately this is just lost. Carlsen seemed to lack any patience. This was just a shot in the dark, but actually it just wrecks his king position. Aronian exchanged everything on e5. But you can see that the connection, there's a connection problem here. Carlsen exchanged rooks and then took on e5, but I mean this just loses instantly. No surprise when the king is so exposed. So check. If the king steps up to g7, then that allows a checkmate. Knight e6 and queen f8. Mate. Well, the king can step up, but this doesn't really help matters. Rook d5 wins, among others. So after check, Carlsen played king f7 to avoid a discovered check. But queen f3, and if the king goes to g7, then queen f8 is once again mate. Or if queen f5, I mean, this is truly horrible. And then king f2, and black isn't going to escape from that pin. So Carlsen played bishop f5, and of course after the exchange and g4, he just loses a piece. Well, he knew this, of course. And he played one more move, queen b4, but after knight d3, he gave in. Well, a check isn't going to help much. The king just steps up to one of these squares, and g2 probably, and then you just take on f5. A very, very simple win. Incredible how Magnus can go from hero to zero in the space of 24 hours. Well, as many people were saying, for example, Kramnik said, Magnus's play was so bad. It was a really strange game, said Kramnik. Most people looking at this game were just kind of completely bemused by really how badly Carlsen played. Extraordinary. Perhaps he's tired, perhaps there was kind of euphoria from the day before, but he just made some very odd decisions. I think, as far as I'm concerned, starting with d takes c4, giving away that centre pawn. I'm sorry to hammer on about this, but I think it's best to keep the centre. Anyway, with one round to go, we have a very interesting situation. Aronian and Carlsen have 5 points. They're in the lead. Half a point behind Vachier-Lagrave, Topalov and Kramnik on 4.5. Now we have some very interesting last round pairings. Aronian plays black against Hare Krishna. Carlsen plays white against Ilyanov. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave plays black against Grandelius. And Topalov plays Kramnik. So it's going to be a fascinating finale. And if there's a tie at the end of the tournament, then they will have some kind of blitz tiebreak. Thanks for watching.